Okay. Good afternoon, all of you. So in last lecture, we have started the unit number 6. Okay. So what is the name of the unit number 6? That is heat exchanger. So first of all, what is meant by heat exchanger? So as we know that heat exchanger is a defined as a equipment. Heat exchanger क्या है? It is a equipment which transfer the energy from a hot fluid to cold fluid. समजले बघा heat exchanger कशाला म्हणायचं आहे? Heat exchanger is a equipment which transfer the energy from hot fluid to cold fluid with maximum rate and minimum investment and running cost. That is nothing but heat exchanger. Okay. So what are the examples related to the heat exchanger? So automobile radiator is there, then intercooler is there, then regenerator air there. So these are the examples for the heat exchanger. These are the examples for the heat exchanger. Okay. So after that, we have started the classification of the heat exchanger. Okay. So basically the heat exchangers are classified on the basis of. So basically there are 4 points. On that basis, heat exchangers are classified. On that basis, heat exchangers are classified. Okay. So first is according to the nature of heat exchange process. Okay. According to the nature of heat exchange process, in that there are two types of heat exchanger, that is direct contact heat exchanger and indirect contact heat exchanger. So what is meant by direct contact heat exchanger? The heat exchanger in which the direct contact of hot fluid and cold fluid is takes place, and because of that direct mixing of hot fluid and cold fluid heat transfer is takes place. समजले? डायरेक्ट कॉन्टॅक्ट हीट एक्सचेंजर कशाला म्हणणार आहे? तर त्याच्यामध्ये हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइड ह्याचं मिक्सिंग होणार आहे आणि बिकॉज ऑफ दॅट मिक्सिंग हीट ट्रान्सफर विल बी टेक्स प्लेस. सो दिस इज अबाउट द डायरेक्ट कॉन्टॅक्ट हीट एक्सचेंजर. Then indirect contact heat exchanger. So in the indirect contact heat exchanger, there is a no mixing of hot fluid and cold fluid. Okay. So in that indirect contact heat exchanger, there are two types of heat exchanger, that is regenerator and recuperator. Regenerator type of heat exchanger and recuperator type of heat exchanger. So what is meant by regenerator? Okay. So in a regenerator type heat exchanger, the hot and cold fluid passes alternatively through a space containing matrix, these particles providing alternately a sink and source for heat flow. Okay. So what is meant by regenerator type of heat exchanger? In this case, we have alternately passing the hot fluid and cold fluid. Suppose first we have to passing the hot fluid. At that time, what will happen? Hot fluid increases the temperature of the solid matrix. Okay. And after that, we have to passing the cold fluid through that solid matrix. So because of that, that solid matrix initially act as a sink, म्हणजे तो heat absorb करून घेणार आहे, आणि ज्यावेळेला आपण cold fluid pass करणार आहे त्यावेळेला तो as it acts as a source, म्हणजे त्यावेळेला तो heat supply करणार आहे. So in this way, heat transfer is takes place from the hot fluid to cold fluid. For that, we have passing the alternately hot fluid and cold fluid. That is nothing but regenerator type of heat exchanger. ह्याच्यामध्ये आपण काय करणार आहे? अल्टरनेटली हॉट आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइड पास करणार आहे, and because of that heat transfer is takes place. Because of that heat transfer is takes place. Okay. So this is about the regenerator type of heat exchanger. Regenerator type of heat exchanger. Okay. So in the indirect contact heat exchanger, there is another type, that is recuperator. Next type is recuperator type of heat exchanger. So what is meant by recuperator type of heat exchanger? So in this type of heat exchanger, fluids exchanging heat are on either side of dividing wall. What is meant by recuperator type of heat exchanger? Fluid exchanging heat one or either side of dividing wall. म्हणजे याच्यामध्ये कसं असणार आहे? Suppose we have to consider the two pipes are there, and in one pipe hot fluid is flowing and another pipe cold fluid is flowing, and these two pipes are attached to each other. So whatever the hot fluid having heat, that heat is transferred to the cold fluid. So in that way, because of that dividing wall, heat transfer takes place from the hot fluid to cold fluid. समजले? रिजनरेटर मध्ये काय करतोय आपण? एकाच पाईप मध्ये पहिला हॉट फ्लुइड पाठवते, त्याच्यानंतर कोल्ड फ्लुइड पाठवते. दॅट इज नथिंग बट रिजनरेटर टाइप ऑफ हीट एक्सचेंजर. आणि रिकपरेटर मध्ये काय करणार आहे? दोन वेगवेगळे पाईप्स असतील किंवा चेंबर्स असतील किंवा कंटेनर्स असतील, तर त्याच्यामध्ये जी काही डिवायडिंग वॉल आहे, एका डिवायडिंग वॉलच्या एका साईडला हॉट फ्लुइड असणार आहे आणि डिवायडिंग वॉलच्या एका साईडला कोल्ड फ्लुइड असणार आहे. So because of that dividing wall, what will happen? The temperature of the hot fluid is reduces and the temperature of cold fluid is increases. So in this way, heat transfer is takes place. That is nothing but recuperator type of heat exchanger. Okay, recuperator type of heat exchanger. Okay, so this is about the first type of first classification of the heat exchanger according to the nature of heat exchange process. In that we have discussed about the direct contact heat exchanger, then indirect contact heat exchanger, and in indirect contact heat exchanger we have discussed the two basic types of indirect contact heat exchanger, that is regenerator and recuperator. Regenerator and recuperator. Okay, so this is the first classification. After that we have discussed about the according to the relative direction of fluid motion, according to the relative direction of fluid motion. So in that we have discussed about the two types. That is first type we have discussed, that is parallel flow or unidirectional flow, and second that is counter flow heat exchanger. Okay, and third type is that we have discussed today, that is cross flow heat exchanger. So according to the relative direction of fluid motion, we have discussed the two types, that is parallel flow, or parallel flow is nothing but unidirectional flow of heat exchanger. So what is meant by parallel flow heat exchanger? So in parallel flow heat exchanger, two fluids travel in the same direction. जे काय आपलं हॉट फ्लुइड असेल, जे काय कोल्ड फ्लुइड असेल, त्याची जी काही डायरेक्शन असणार आहे फ्लो व्हायची, ती डायरेक्शन काय असणार आहे? सेम असणार आहे. ओके, और द टू स्ट्रीम्स एंटर ऍट वन एंड अँड लिव्ह ऍट द अदर एंड. म्हणजे जी काही दोन्ही फ्लुइडची जी एंट्री असणार आहे ती एका डायरेक्शन मधून असणार आहे, आणि जी काही फ्लुइड लिव्हिंग होणार आहे त्या पाईप मधून ती जी लिव्हिंग होणार आहे ती एंड पण काय असणार आहे? सेम असणार आहे. ओके, सो इन पॅरल फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर द टू फ्लुइड स्ट्रीम्स ट्रॅव्हल इन दी सेम डायरेक्शन. दोन्ही फ्लुइड जर एकाच डायरेक्शनला मूव्ह होत असतील तर दॅट टाइप ऑफ हीट एक्सचेंजर इज नथिंग बट parallel flow heat exchanger. Okay, parallel flow heat exchanger. After that we have discussed the another type, that is counter flow heat exchanger. So what is meant by counter flow heat exchanger? So in counter flow heat exchanger, the two fluids flow in opposite direction. जी काही हॉट फ्लुइड आहे, जे काही कोल्ड फ्लुइड आहे, ह्यांची जी काही मुव्हिंग डायरेक्शन जी असणार आहे ती काय असणार आहे? अपोजिट असणार आहे. म्हणजे एक फ्लुइड जर फॉरवर्ड डायरेक्शनला जात असेल आणि दुसरं फ्लुइड काय होणार आहे? बॅकवर्ड डायरेक्शनला जाणार आहे. इथं काय असणार आहे? डायरेक्शन ऑफ फ्लुइड मोशन इज दी opposite. That is nothing but counter flow heat exchanger. ओके, समजले का? बघा, पॅरलल फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर मध्ये हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइड एका डायरेक्शन मध्ये मूव्ह होणार आहे. काउंटर फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर मध्ये हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइडची मोशनची डायरेक्शन काय असणार आहे? अपोजिट असणार आहे. दॅट इज नथिंग बट काउंटर फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर. आफ्टर दॅट थर्ड type of the heat exchanger, that is according to the nature of direction of fluid motion, that is cross flow heat exchanger. So all of you write down third type, third type cross flow heat exchanger. All of you write down cross flow heat exchanger, cross flow heat exchanger, cross flow heat exchanger. ओके, क्रॉस फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर ह्या शब्दावरूनच आपल्याला कळतंय की जे काही एका डायरेक्शनला फ्लुइड मूव्ह होत असेल तर त्याला क्रॉसिंग मध्ये दुसरं फ्लुइड मूव्ह होणार आहे. ओके, क्रॉसिंग मध्ये म्हणजे काय असणार आहे? अनदर फ्लुइड इज मुव्हिंग इन दी राईट अँगल टू दॅट पर्टिक्युलर हॉट फ्लुइड डायरेक्शन. म्हणजे हॉट फ्लुइड समजा फॉरवर्ड डायरेक्शन मूव्ह होत असेल तर त्याला राईट अँगल मध्ये काय होणार आहे, किंवा त्याच्या क्रॉस डायरेक्शन मध्ये काय होणार आहे? कोल्ड फ्लुइड आपण मूव्ह करणार आहे. अँड इन दॅट वे हीट ट्रान्सफर इज takes place. That is nothing but cross flow heat exchanger. Okay, so all of you write down in cross flow heat exchanger, write down third type cross flow heat exchanger, cross flow heat exchanger, cross flow heat exchanger. In cross flow heat exchanger, in cross flow heat exchanger, the two fluids cross one another. In cross flow heat exchanger, the two fluids cross one another in space. Two fluids cross one another in space, one another in space, usually at right angles, usually at right angles. ओके, म्हणजे जे काही दोन फ्लुइड मूव्ह होणार आहेत ते एकमेकाला कसे असणार आहेत? राईट अँगल मध्ये मूव्ह होणार आहेत. ओके, that is nothing but cross flow heat exchanger. Okay, so in cross flow heat exchanger the two fluids cross one another in space, usually at right angles. And all of you draw these two diagrams. Okay, what direction of the hot fluid and direction of the cold fluid. So in the first diagram, the cold fluid moving in the zigzag manner, that is mixing of hot steam is takes place. And in the second diagram, cold fluid is moving in the straight direction. Okay, so that meaning of each is given hot fluid, that is no mixing of streams for the both diagrams. Cold fluid for the first diagram, mixing of the stream. So in that hot stream also mixing with that cold fluids. Okay, and for the second diagram, cold fluid no mixing of stream. And they are given the according to the diagram, what are the examples for this type of construction, that is cooling unit of the refrigeration system मध्ये जी काही पहिली डायग्राम आहे त्याच्याप्रमाणे क्रॉस फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर असणार आहे, आणि ऑटोमोबाईल रेडिएटर आहे त्याच्यामध्ये काय असणार आहे, सेकंड टाइपचं कन्स्ट्रक्शन असणार आहे. ओके, सो ऑल ऑफ यू ड्रॉ दिस डायग्राम, क्रॉस फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर. All of you complete this both diagrams. So hot fluid moving in the horizontal direction, दोन्ही केस मध्ये जे काही hot fluid आहे, so hot fluid in and hot fluid out. तसंच दुसऱ्या डायग्राम मध्ये hot fluid in, hot fluid out. ओके, आणि त्याच्या क्रॉस मध्ये काय होणार आहे, cold fluid in, cold fluid out असणार आहे. ओके, फक्त पहिल्या डायग्राम मध्ये झिगझॅग मॅनर मध्ये आपण त्याचे डायरेक्शन दाखवलेले आहे, म्हणजे तिथं मिक्स्ड हॉट स्ट्रीम सुद्धा असणार आहे. Okay, and in the second diagram we have given the straight lines for the cold fluid also. So therefore only in the straight line manner cold fluid is moving into that particular section. Okay, so these are the two types of the cross flow heat exchanger. Okay, hot fluid is moving in the straight direction, but in the first diagram cold fluid is moving in the zigzag manner, and in the second diagram cold fluid is moving in the straight manner. Okay, so in the first diagram cold fluid is in the zigzag manner, means what is the meaning of that, mixed hot streams are there. Okay, and in the second case there is a no mixed hot streams are there. Okay, so first case is the example for the cooling unit of the refrigeration system, and second unit is the example for the automobile radiator, automobile radiator. Okay, so all of you complete these both diagrams and write down the information which is written at the below of the diagram. Okay, so all of you write down the meaning of each. Hot fluid for the first diagram, no mixing of streams. Cold fluid, mixing of streams. An example is cooling unit of refrigeration system. Cooling unit of refrigeration system. In the second diagram, hot fluid, no mixing of the streams, and cold fluid, that is same, no mixing of the streams. And example is automobile radiator. Okay, so all of you complete these two diagrams and write down the information which is given at the below of the diagram. Okay, if you have written, then put the message in the chat box so that I will proceed. All of you complete both the diagrams and whatever the information written at the below of the diagram. After completion of the diagram, all of you put the message in the chat box so that I will proceed to the next classification of the heat exchanger. Okay, anyone put the message in the chat box so that I will proceed. Diagrams are over. ओके, सो दिस इज अबाउट दी क्रॉस फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर. म्हणजे एकमेकाला राईट अँगल मध्ये काय होणार आहे, हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइड मूव्ह होणार आहे. ओके, सो दिस इज द क्लासिफिकेशन अकॉर्डिंग टू दी रिलेटिव्ह डायरेक्शन ऑफ दी फ्लुइड मोशन. त्याच्यामध्ये पहिला टाइप आपण बघितलेला आहे पॅरलल फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर, सेकंड वन काउंटर फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर अँड थर्ड वन क्रॉस फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर. पॅरलल फ्लो मध्ये काय असणार आहे, हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइडची डायरेक्शन काय असणार आहे, सेम असणार आहे. काउंटर फ्लो मध्ये काय असणार आहे, हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइडची डायरेक्शन काय असणार आहे, अपोजिट असणार आहे. आणि क्रॉस फ्लो मध्ये काय असणार आहे, हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइडची डायरेक्शन एकमेकांना कशी असणार आहे, राईट अँगल मध्ये असणार आहे. सो दिस इज दी classification of heat exchanger according to the relative direction of the fluid motion. Relative direction of the fluid motion. Okay, then write down the third type, third classification according to the design and constructional features. Write down third type according to the design and constructional features. According to the design and according to the design and constructional features, design and constructional features, design and constructional features. Okay, so whatever the different designs are there for the heat exchanger, so according to the design or according to the constructional features, what are the different types of the heat exchanger. Okay, so in that we have to write down the first type of heat exchanger, that is concentric tubes. Okay, so all of you write down concentric tube. कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स म्हणजे जे काही डिझाईन आहे किंवा जे काही कन्स्ट्रक्शन आहे त्याच्यावरून त्याचे कुठले कुठले टाइप्स असू शकतात. ओके, इन दॅट फर्स्ट टाइप इज कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स. सो व्हॉट इज द मिनिंग ऑफ दिस कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स, म्हणजे एकाच ट्यूब मध्ये आणखी एक ट्यूब असणार आहे. एका ट्यूब मध्ये हॉट फ्लुइड असेल तर दुसऱ्या ट्यूब मध्ये काय असणार आहे, कोल्ड फ्लुइड असणार आहे. अँड बिकॉज ऑफ दॅट हीट ट्रान्सफर इज टेक्स प्लेस. समजले का, व्हॉट इज द मिनिंग ऑफ द कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स. इन वन ट्यूब देर इज ए अनदर ट्यूब, and from the one tube hot fluid is moving, and in the another tube cold fluid is moving. Okay, whatever may be the direction, it may be parallel flow, it may be counter flow heat exchanger, but in the tube there is a another tube, and in one tube is there is a hot fluid, then another tube is having cold fluid. Direction may be same or may be different. That is nothing but concentric tube heat exchanger. अकॉर्डिंग टू द डिझाईन अँड कन्स्ट्रक्शन पहिला टाइप काय असणार आहे, तर कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स म्हणजे ट्यूब मध्ये ट्यूब असणार आहे. दॅट इज नथिंग बट कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब हीट एक्सचेंजर. सो ऑल ऑफ यू राईट डाउन फर्स्ट वन कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स, कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स, कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स, concentric tubes. Okay, so write down two concentric tubes are used, two concentric tubes are used, two concentric tubes are used, each carrying one of the fluids, each carrying one of the fluids, each carrying one of the fluids, one of the fluids, full stop. The direction of flow may be parallel or counter. The direction of flow may be parallel or counter. The direction of flow may be parallel or counter. म्हणजे जे काही हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइड मूव्ह होणार आहे, आतमधल्या ट्यूब मधून समजा हॉट फ्लुइड असेल, सराउंडिंगच्या ट्यूब मधून जर कोल्ड फ्लुइड पास होत असेल तर दॅट इज नथिंग बट कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स. पण त्याची डायरेक्शन समजा अपोजिट असेल, सेम असेल, दॅट इज नथिंग बट कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब टाइप ऑफ हीट एक्सचेंजर. ओके, So all of you draw that diagram. So whatever the diagram I have drawn there. So this is the diagram for the parallel flow heat exchanger. So parallel and counter flow heat exchanger, this is also nothing but concentric type of heat exchanger. So because in that tube is there, so therefore parallel and counter flow heat exchanger is nothing but concentric tube type of heat exchanger is there. So I have drawn one diagram there. At the center there is a one pipe, and from that pipe hot fluid is flowing, that is inlet temperature is th1 and outlet temperature is th2, and at the periphery of that pipe there is a cold fluid pipe, and inlet temperature of that cold fluid is tc1 and outlet temperature of cold fluid is tc2. So I have drawn a preview of that particular parallel flow heat exchanger, and that is nothing but it is shown as a tube in tube heat exchanger. Okay, so all of you draw the diagram of concentric tubes. Concentric tubes. Okay, so all of you draw the diagram. Concentric tube type of heat exchanger. Concentric tube म्हणजे ट्यूब मध्ये काय असणार आहे, ट्यूब असणार आहे. That type of heat exchanger is nothing but concentric tube type of heat exchanger. Okay, so this is the first type according to the design and constructional features. According to the design and constructional features, first type is concentric tube type of heat exchanger. Concentric tube type of heat exchanger. Okay, then second shell and tube heat exchanger. Second type is shell and tube heat exchanger. Shell and tube heat exchanger. आता ह्या शब्दावरूनच आपल्याला कळते शेल अँड ट्यूब टाइप ऑफ हीट एक्सचेंजर म्हणजे याच्यामध्ये काय असणार आहे, एक शेल असणार आहे, अँड इन दॅट शेल देर आर डिफरंट टाइप्स ऑफ ट्यूब्स आर देअर. Okay, so in this type of heat exchanger one of the fluids flows through a bundle of tubes. म्हणजे त्या शेलच्या आतमध्ये जेवढ्या काय ट्यूब्स आहेत, ट्यूबचा जो काही बंडल आहे त्याच्यामधून काय होणार आहे, एक फ्लुइड मूव्ह होणार आहे, अँड द अदर फ्लुइड इज फोर्स्ड थ्रू दी शेल अँड इट फ्लोज ओव्हर दी आउटसाइड सरफेस ऑफ द ट्यूब्स. समजते बघा, जे काही बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब्स असणार आहे त्या शेल मध्ये असणार आहे, त्या बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब्स मधून समजा हॉट फ्लुइड मूव्ह होत असेल तर त्याच्या सराउंडिंग मधून, त्या फ्लुइडच्या सराउंडिंग मध्ये म्हणजे त्या शेलच्या आतमध्ये कोल्ड फ्लुइड काय होणार आहे, सर्क्युलेट होणार आहे. सो इन दॅट वे हीट ट्रान्सफर इज टेक्स प्लेस. ओके, शेल म्हणजे काय असणार आहे, एक कंटेनर असणार आहे मोठा, आणि त्या कंटेनर मध्ये बंडल ऑफ पाइप्स ट्यूब्स असणार आहेत. तर त्या बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब्स मधून सपोज यू हॅव टू कन्सिडर फ्रॉम दॅट बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब्स हॉट फ्लुइड इज फ्लोइंग. Okay, and over that bundle of tubes there is a space is available, and from that space we have to supplying the cold fluid, and because of that what will happen, cold fluid absorbing the energy from the hot fluid, and because of that heat transfer is takes place. Okay, so I have drawn the diagram. So from that diagram we have to understood there is a one shell, जे काय आउटसाइड सरफेस जे काय मोठा कंटेनर दिसतोय तो म्हणजे काय असणार आहे, इट इज ए शेल असणार आहे, आणि आतमध्ये तुम्हाला ट्यूब्स दिसतात. that tubes is nothing but bundle of tubes. Okay, so at the bottom side, half portion of the bottom side hot fluid, from that bottom side tubes hot fluid is moving, and from the left side that hot fluid is coming out, then that hot fluid again moving from the upward two tubes, and that hot fluid coming out from the upper side of the right hand side. Okay, and then at the bottom side there is a cold fluid inlet is there. Okay, so from that we have to supplying the cold fluid into the container, and that cold fluid is moving throughout the bundle of tubes. जे काही बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब्स असणार आहे त्याच्यावरून काय होणार आहे, कोल्ड फ्लुइड मूव्ह होणार आहे, आणि त्याच्या डायरेक्शन साठी काय असणार आहे, तिथं बॅफल प्लेट असणार आहे. बिकॉज ऑफ दॅट बॅफल प्लेट्स व्हॉट विल हॅपन, दॅट कोल्ड फ्लुइड maximum in contact with the hot fluid, and because of the maximum heat transfer is takes place. समजले, ते बॅफलच्या का प्लेट्स जे आहेत ते काय करणार आहेत, त्याला एक मोशन देणार आहेत, त्याला एक डायरेक्शन देणार आहेत, and because of that direction maximum heat transfer will be takes place. Okay, so from that over the bundle of tubes cold fluid is moving. That baffle tubes gives the direction to that particular cold fluid, and because of that heat transfer is takes place. So this is nothing but shell and tube heat exchanger. मोठा जो कंटेनर आहे त्याला शेल म्हटलं जातंय, आणि त्याच्या आतमध्ये ज्या काही ट्यूब्स आहेत, बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब्स आहेत, त्याला काय म्हटलं जाते, तर ट्यूब्स म्हटलं जाते. and this is nothing but shell and tube type of heat exchanger. ओके, तर त्याच्यामध्ये जे काही ट्यूबचा बंडल आहे त्याच्यामधून हॉट फ्लुइड मूव्ह होणार आहे, आणि त्या बंडलच्या ज्या काही फेरीमध्ये जो काही स्पेस असणार आहे त्याच्यामध्ये आपण काय करणार आहे, बॅफलच्या साह्यानं कोल्ड फ्लुइड सप्लाय करणार आहे. and because of that what will happen, the heat transfer takes place between the hot fluid and cold fluid. Okay, so this is nothing but shell and tube heat exchanger, shell and tube heat exchanger. Okay, so all of you write down, in this type of heat exchanger, in this type of heat exchanger, in this type of heat exchanger, one of the fluids flows. In this type of heat exchanger, one of the fluids, one of the fluids flows through a bundle of tubes, flows through a bundle of tubes, flows through a bundle of tubes, flows through a bundle of tubes enclosed by a shell, bundle of tubes enclosed by a shell, enclosed by a shell, enclosed by a shell, full stop. The other fluid is forced through, the other fluid is forced through, the other fluid is forced through the shell, other fluid is forced through the shell, the shell, and it flows, forced through the shell, and it flows over the outside surface, is forced through the shell, is forced through the shell, and it flows, and it flows, and it flows over the outside surface of the tubes, it flows over the outside surface of the tubes, outside surface of the tubes, outside surface of the tubes. Okay, समजले का सगळ्यांना? बघा, शेल म्हणजे काय असणार आहे? शेल इज नथिंग बट इट इज a container, and in that container there are number of tubes, bundle of tubes. So from the tube there is a hot fluid is moving, and over that tubes by using the baffles we are supplying the cold fluid. So because of that heat transfer takes place between the hot fluid and cold fluid. This is nothing but shell and tube heat exchanger. Okay, so all of you draw this diagram for the shell and tube heat exchanger. Draw this diagram, shell and tube heat exchanger. After completion of the diagram, put that message in the chat box. Okay. So diagram is over. Shell and tube heat exchanger. Okay. So this is the shell and tube heat exchanger. So now we have to see the next type of the heat exchanger according to the design and constructional features. Okay. So write down third, multiple shell and tube passes. Write down multiple shell and tube passes. Multiple shell and tube passes. Okay. So why we have to use this multiple shell and tube passes? So in the earlier case, we are using the only one shell. Okay, so it is possible to use the multiple shells. Okay, so by using the multiple shell we can improve the overall heat transfer coefficient, or we are enhancing the overall heat transfer. Okay, so therefore write down third type, that is multiple shell and tube passes. 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 Okay, so write down multiple shell and tube passes are used. Multiple shell and tube passes are used. Multiple shell and tube passes are used for enhancing the overall heat transfer. Are used for enhancing the overall heat transfer. Enhancing the overall heat transfer. Enhancing the overall heat transfer. So this is the third type. So by using the third type, we have to improve the overall heat transfer. Okay. So this is the third type according to the design and constructional feature. Then we have to write down the fourth type, that is compact heat exchanger. Okay. According to the design and construction, next type is the compact heat exchanger. So all of you write down compact heat exchanger. Compact heat exchanger. So what is meant by compact heat exchanger? So there are special purpose heat exchanger and have a very large transfer surface area per unit volume of the exchanger. The compact heat exchanger काय असणार आहे? So it is nothing but special purpose heat exchanger. So as per the applications or as per the requirement, we have to use this compact heat exchanger, that is special purpose heat exchanger. We have to use the special purpose heat exchanger. Okay, so all of you write down the next type, that is compact heat exchanger. Compact heat exchanger. Compact heat exchanger. So write down there are compact heat exchanger. There are special purpose heat exchanger. There are special purpose heat exchanger. Special purpose heat exchanger and have a very large and have and have a very large transfer surface area and have a very large transfer surface area per unit volume of the exchanger per unit volume of the exchanger per unit volume of the exchanger per unit volume of the exchange. Example, write down the example for the compact heat exchanger, that is plate fin. Example, plate fin is the compact heat exchanger. So according to the application or according to purpose, we have to design this type of heat exchanger, that is compact heat exchanger. Okay, and what is this? In this we have to very large transfer surface area per unit volume of the exchanger is there. Okay, so this is about the compact heat exchanger. समजले का बघा सगळ्यांना. So according to the design and construction features, there are four types of heat exchanger is there. First one is concentric tubes, म्हणजे एकाच ट्यूब मध्ये दुसरी ट्यूब असणार आहे. एका ट्यूब मध्ये हॉट फ्लुइड असणार आहे, दुसऱ्या ट्यूब मध्ये कोल्ड फ्लुइड असणार आहे. आणि इन दॅट वे हीट ट्रान्सफर टेक्स प्लेस. दॅट इज नथिंग बट कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स. ओके, देन सेकंड टाइप इज शेल अँड ट्यूब, म्हणजे एक मोठा शेल असणार आहे, त्याच्यामध्ये बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब्स असणार आहेत. बंडल ऑफ ट्यूब मध्ये हॉट फ्लुइड असेल तर त्याच्या सराउंडिंग मध्ये बॅफलच्या साहाय्याने आपण कोल्ड फ्लुइड मूव्ह करणार आहे. दॅट इज नथिंग बट शेल अँड ट्यूब हीट एक्सचेंजर. देन मल्टिपल शेल अँड ट्यूब पासेस, म्हणजे काय असणार आहे, याच्यामध्ये शेलची जी काही नंबर असणार आहे तो इन्क्रीज केला जाईल. म्हणजे इन दॅट केस देर आर मल्टिपल शेल्स आर देअर. ओके, and by using that we have to improve the overall heat transfer. We have to improve the overall heat transfer. And after that, fourth type is compact heat exchanger. So this is special purpose heat exchanger and have a very large transfer surface area per unit volume of the exchanger. So this is about the according to the design and construction, we have these are the types of the heat exchanger. Okay, then write down the last classification according to the physical state of fluids. Write down next classification, that is fourth, according to the physical state of fluids. According to the physical state of fluids. Physical state of fluids. Physical state of fluids. Okay, so according to the physical state, there are two types of heat exchanger, that is condenser and evaporator. Okay, condensers and evaporators. Okay, so in the according to the physical state of fluids, there are two types of heat exchanger, condensers and evaporators. Okay, so first we have to write down the condensers. Okay, so write down the condensers. So in the condenser, the condensing fluid remains at constant temperature. जे काही कंडेन्सिंग फ्लुइड असणार आहे त्याचं टेम्परेचर काय असणार आहे, कॉन्स्टंट असणार आहे. अँड हॅव्हिंग हाय टेम्परेचर, जे काही कंडेन्सिंग फ्लुइड असतं त्याचं टेम्परेचर काय असतं, जास्त असतं. ओके, थ्रू आउट द एक्सचेंजर, while the temperature of cold fluid gradually to temperature, you have applying the fluid. Because of that, what will happen, the cold absorbing the heat from that condensing, temperature of that particular cold is increases. Okay, so the condenser,
condenser is in a condenser, the condensing fluid remains at constant temperature, remains at constant temperature, remains at constant temperature throughout the exchanger, throughout the exchanger, throughout the exchanger, while the temperature of the colder fluid, while the temperature of the colder fluid, while the temperature of the colder fluid gradually increases from temperature of the colder fluid gradually increases from inlet to outlet, inlet to outlet, ओके, इनलेट टू आउटलेट. त्याच्यामुळे काय होणार आहे, फ्लोड फ्लूचं टेम्परेचर इनलेट टू आउटलेट इन्क्रीज होणार आहे. ओके, फुल स्टॉप. नेक्स्ट लाईन. द हॉट फ्लूइड लुजेस, the hot fluid loses, the hot fluid loses latent part of heat, the hot fluid loses latent part of heat which is accepted by the cold fluid. The hot fluid loses latent part of heat, latent part of heat which is accepted by the cold fluid. जे काय हॉट फ्लूइड आहे ते काय करणार आहे, लूज करणार आहे हीट, आणि ते कोण गेन करणार आहे, कोल्ड फ्लूइड ऍक्सेप्ट करणार आहे. ओके, सो द हॉट फ्लूइड लुजेस लॅटेंट पार्ट ऑफ हीट which is accepted by the cold fluid, which is accepted by the cold fluid. Okay, so this is about the condenser. कंडेन्सरला हीट एक्सचेंजर का म्हटलं जातं, तर त्याच्यामध्ये हीट ट्रान्सफर केली जाते. ओके, सो द हीट एक्सचेंज होते. सो देयरफॉर condenser is nothing but it is a type of heat exchanger. Okay, so all of you draw the diagram. Yes sir, take at the upper side. Okay, so this is the diagram for the condenser. There is a hot fluid. Hot fluid is nothing but condensing fluid having same temperature is there, th1 to th2. So because of that, cold temperature, cold fluid having temperature is increases from tc1 to tc2. So this is the diagram for the condenser. This is the diagram for the condenser. Okay, this is the diagram for the condenser. Okay, so all of you draw this diagram. So in the x-axis length is there, and in the y-axis temperature is there. So hot fluid temperature remains same, that is th1 to th2, and cold fluid temperature is increases from tc1 to tc2, tc1 to tc2, and direction of these two fluids is same. Okay, so this is about the condenser, which is based on the physical state of the fluid. This is the type of heat exchanger, that is condenser. Then write down second type, that is evaporator. Write down second type, evaporator. इव्हॅपोरेटर. तर मगाच्या कंडेन्सिंग फ्लुइड जे असणार आहे ते हॉट असणार आहे, त्याचं टेम्परेचर जास्त असणार आहे. आता इथे इव्हॅपोरेटर जो असणार आहे तर याच्यामध्ये जे बॉइलिंग फ्लुइड म्हटलं जात आहे ते कोल्ड असणार आहे. ओके, म्हणजे इथे जे कोल्ड फ्लुइडचं टेम्परेचर असणार आहे ते सेम असणार आहे, TC1 टू TC2, and temperature of hot fluid is reduces from TH1 to TH2, TH1 to TH2. Okay, so write down evaporators. Evaporators. In this case, in this case, in this case, the boiling fluid in the bracket cold fluid. Okay, evaporator मध्ये जे काही boiling fluid असणार आहे त्याला काय म्हटलं जाते, cold fluid म्हटलं जाते. So write down, in this case, the boiling fluid in bracket cold fluid remains at constant temperature, remains at constant temperature, remains at constant temperature, while the temperature of hot fluid, while the while the while the temperature of hot fluid, while the temperature of hot fluid gradually decreases from, temperature of hot fluid gradually decreases from inlet to outlet. Hot fluid gradually increases from inlet to outlet. Inlet to outlet. Okay, समजलं का बघा. So in this case the temperature of cold fluid is remain same, that is Tc1 to Tc2, the temperature is the same. So because of that what will happen, the temperature of hot fluid is reduces. So what way the temperature of hot fluid is reduces, from the Th1 to Th2. Okay, so Th1 to Th2 the temperature of hot fluid is reduces. Okay, and Tc1 to Tc1 Tc2, that is the cold fluid temperature, and which is constant temperature, which is constant temperature. Okay, so this is the second type according to the physical state of the fluid, that is condenser and evaporator, condenser and evaporator. Okay, so here we have completed the types of heat exchanger or classification of the heat exchanger, classification of the heat exchanger. So we have discussed about the four classifications. First one, according to the nature of heat exchange process. In that we have discussed the direct contact heat exchanger and indirect contact heat exchanger. So in that indirect contact heat exchanger we have discussed about the regenerator and recuperator, regenerator and recuperator. ओके, डायरेक्ट कॉन्टॅक्ट मध्ये काय असणार आहे, दोन्ही फ्लुइड एकमेकांमध्ये मिक्स होणार आहेत. इनडायरेक्ट मध्ये दोन्ही फ्लुइड एकमेकांमध्ये मिक्स होणार नाहीत. त्याच्यामध्ये जो रिजनरेटर असणार आहे त्याच्यामध्ये आपण काय करणार आहे, अल्टरनेटली वे ऑफ सप्लाइंग दी हॉट फ्लुइड अँड कोल्ड फ्लुइड. आणि रिक्युपरेटर मध्ये काय असणार आहे, दोन्ही फ्लुइडच्या मध्ये एक डिवायडिंग वॉल असणार आहे. एका साइडनं हॉट फ्लुइड असणार आहे, दुसऱ्या साइडनं कोल्ड फ्लुइड असणार आहे. सो दिस इज अबाउट दी अकॉर्डिंग टू दी नेचर of heat exchange process. Okay, then second, relative direction of fluid motion, relative direction of fluid motion. So according to there are three types, that is parallel flow, counter flow and cross flow heat exchanger. Parallel flow मध्ये काय असणार आहे, हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइडची डायरेक्शन सेम असणार आहे. काउंटर फ्लो मध्ये काय असणार आहे, हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइडची डायरेक्शन अपोजिट असणार आहे. आणि क्रॉस फ्लो हीट एक्सचेंजर मध्ये काय असणार आहे, हॉट फ्लुइड आणि कोल्ड फ्लुइडची डायरेक्शन एकमेकाला राईट अँगल्स मध्ये असणार आहे. सो दिस इज द टाइप्स अकॉर्डिंग टू द रिलेटिव्ह डायरेक्शन ऑफ द fluid motion, relative direction of the fluid motion. After that we have discussed about the design and according to the design and construction features. तर जी काय डिझाईन आहे किंवा जे काही कन्स्ट्रक्शन फीचर आहे त्याच्यानुसार कुठले कुठले टाइप्स असणार आहे, दॅट इज कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब्स. कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब मध्ये काय असणार आहे, एका ट्यूब मध्ये दुसरे ट्यूब असणार आहे, एकामध्ये हॉट फ्लुइड असणार आहे, दुसऱ्यामध्ये कोल्ड फ्लुइड असणार आहे. दॅट इज नथिंग बट कॉन्सेंट्रिक ट्यूब टाइप ऑफ हीट एक्सचेंजर. देन शेल अँड ट्यूब टाइप ऑफ हीट एक्सचेंजर. शेल म्हणजे काय असणार, एक मोठा कंटेनर असणार आहे, आणि इन दॅट देर आर bundle of tubes are there. From the bundle of tubes one fluid is moving, and from the shell by using the baffles another fluid is moving, and because of that what will happen, heat transfer is takes place. That is nothing but shell and tube heat exchanger, shell and tube heat exchanger. Okay, then after that we have discussed about the third type, that is multiple shell and tube process. So this type we have to use the increase the or enhancing the overall heat transfer. In this case there are multiple shells are there. Okay, so by using that we have to enhance the overall heat transfer. Okay, after that we have discussed about the compact heat exchanger. So this is the special purpose heat exchanger, and because of that large transfer surface area per unit volume we get, and that is nothing but compact heat exchanger. That is nothing but compact heat exchanger. And after that we have discussed about the according to the physical state of fluids. Okay, according to the physical state of fluids there are two types of heat exchanger, that is condenser and evaporator. So in the condenser, hot fluid having same temperature is there, that is condensing fluid, that is Th1 to Th2 temperature is the same, and cold fluid temperature is increases from Tc1 to Tc2. Okay, and the second type is evaporator, and the temperature of cold fluid is same and temperature of hot fluid is reduces from the Th1 to
TH2, TH1 to TH2. So this is the classification of the heat exchanger. This is the classification of the heat exchanger. Okay. So now from tomorrow's lecture, we have to start the heat exchanger analysis. So in that we have to discuss the LMTD method, that is log mean temperature difference method. Okay. So for the we have to derive the equation for the LMTD for the parallel flow heat exchanger and LMTD for the counter flow heat exchanger. Okay, so all of you put your roll numbers in the chat box. I will take your attendance. Yes, sir. Stop the recording and leave the meeting.